Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome. Glad to have you here with us today. For those of you who are in our Extra Mile study group, you know me. My name is Jackson Mummy. And for those of you who are listening to this as the podcast or watching on a video later, you will find out very quickly who I am, I guess. No, I'm really here. That's me. And for the past 25 years or so, I've been successfully preparing students to take their bar exams all around the country. And in today's Facebook Live video and podcast, we're going to talk about some recently announced changes in the multi-state bar exam, and this is maybe it's big news, maybe not. We're going to try and break it down a little bit, so love to get your questions and comments. I am going to try and track here on my second device. I hope I'll be able to see comments if they come up. If not, I promise I'll reply offline later. So I just want to talk through a few things with you today. For those of you in our course, this is particularly relevant, but obviously for anybody taking the bar exam who's watching, I want to make sure that you get that information as well. So here's the deal, and here's what's going on in the world of the multi-state. There were some changes announced very quietly in the last 2 days. And by very quietly, I mean just a little notice up on the NCBE's website. That's the National Conference of Bar Examiners. And, they could have probably done a little more than that, but that's how they tend to do these sorts of things. And we've got some new information for you. What we're going to be looking at, a couple of things. One is the changes for February 2017. So certainly for those of you looking up at the 2017 exams, this is going to be important. And then we're also going to look at some changes in the subject matter outline and the allocation of questions and how that impacts. So if you're probably going to want to take some notes because I'm going to be fairly specific there. And then we're also going to look at some early press release notices from the National Conference about multi-state scores from the July 2016 exam. That will obviously be important to those of you that took that exam, but I want to temper your expectations. It's not going to tell you anything specifically for you. It's just general information. And while I'd love it to be something you could go, oh, well, of course, that explains it all. It doesn't. But we'll try and break it down a little bit and give you some idea of what to expect over the next few weeks as we go along. So I hope that makes sense. And then I'm going to try and take some time at the end for any questions that anyone's got. And see if we can help anybody out there with their questions. Let me just make sure we're getting people that desperately want to get on to the group today. Isn't that funny? Okay. All right. Now we go. I think we got everybody there. All right. Well, great. Well, let's jump in. And for those of you watching on the video, you should be able to see this particular memo and notice that came out from the National Conference. And it's an interesting sort of way to announce a big change or a semi-big change, but here is the change. As you probably know, the MBE consists of 200 multiple choice questions across 7 different subjects. Now, historically, what's always been done is that there have been a situation in which you had 10 practice questions mixed in with the 200. Now, these 10 practice questions didn't actually count for anything, but you didn't know which ones were practice and which ones were real. So that made it a little bit more challenging, I think. Well, now, here's what the MBE or the NCBE said just the other day in a press release or on their website. They said, what we're going to do is that the MBE consists of 200 questions, 175 scored questions, and 25 unscored pretest questions. Excuse me? I mean, the pretest questions are indistinguishable from those that are scored, so examinees should answer all questions. Duh. Yeah, absolutely. The exam is divided in morning and afternoon, 3 hours each, 100 questions in each session. So, then the examiners go on to say, which I think is pretty obvious, that the 175 scored questions will be distributed evenly with 25 questions in each of 7 subject areas. Now, previously, what happened was that you had 28 or 27 questions in particular subjects. It was a little bit unweighted and uneven. So the examiners don't put out a press release. They don't do anything. They just kind of quietly say this. So why did they do it that way? Well, I think that they don't want panic. They don't want, there was a group, wasn't there, Panic at the Disco? I don't know. They don't want panic at the bar exam. And so they're going for this very low-key approach to making the announcement. And I want to stay fairly low-key about this as well, because ultimately, I think it's actually good news. I don't think it's a big deal. But what it's doing, in effect, is it's taking off 2, 3, 4 questions out of each subject that are potentially testable and scorable, and reducing everything down to 25 questions. Now, in my view, if you take those questions out of some of these subjects like property or con law, whatever your particular I hate that subject is, that's probably good news, having only 25 questions. And so I think that's a good sign generally. These 25 questions that are going to be pretest questions, well, what does that mean? Well, what the examiners are doing is that they are taking questions that they'd like to use in future exams, and they're putting them in the exam to get a baseline, to get a norm line, to see if the question is a valid statistical question. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. When it isn't, when it's a really off-the-wall, crazy, badass question, which happens, it sends bar takers into a complete frenzy because you have no way of knowing if the questions are good questions or bad questions, if they're the real thing or the test thing. So I want to just say to all of you right now taking the exams going forward, you're going to have to chill. With 25 questions on this exam that are testable questions, I mean pre-test for the examiners, there are going to be some weird questions. And there are going to be some questions where you are just scratching your head and you have no idea what's going on. It's because they're not very well written sometimes, and you can't let that freak you out. Does that everybody agree? We got that clear? There are going to be bad questions on the test now, more than there were before. 10 questions out of 200, yeah, a couple might throw you. 25 out of 200, well, you're more likely to notice it. And so I just want everybody right at the beginning to just take a chill and relax and recognize that some of those questions that will look completely absurd and ridiculous to you probably don't count. And the worst thing you can do is to get upset about one of those. And I've seen people do this in the past, where they get one of those questions and they assume, because they have no way of knowing is it a real one or a fake one, they think, oh my God, there's something new on the exam, there's something that's changed, oh, I didn't know that, and then they freak themselves out and they have all kinds of problems on the exam. So we don't want you doing that. We want you to just relax and work through the questions. Some are going to be good, some are going to be bad. Now, across these 25 questions in each subject, what I think is more significant, what I find interesting that virtually no one's talking about yet, and I love this when people are posting all of the, here's my, deep commentary about it. How about going to the source and just asking and finding out what's actually changed within the topic? So I want to do that for you right now. I want to talk about how many questions exist in each subject area within topics, because to me this is actually more significant than anything else. And I don't have a good visual for you, so I'm afraid you're just going to have to watch me read it or listen to me read it. But let's just walk through the 7 subjects, and I'm going to try and overview for you what's going on. The first of the 7 MBE subjects is called civil procedure. And the way that you have to think about this is that out of the 24 or 25 questions, here's what the examiners now are saying. Approximately 2/3 of the questions, or about 18 of the questions, are going to come from the categories of jurisdiction, venue, jury trials, verdicts and judgments, and appealability and review. Okay, so that's where most of the questions will come. Jurisdiction and venue obviously is the biggest part of that. 6 or 7 questions will come from these topics: the law applied by the federal courts, pretrial procedures, and motions. So if you're really worried about motion practice, I think that you're going to see that's a pretty small area. It's only 6 questions. So that's your 25 questions in civil procedure. Kind of interesting. Now, in constitutional law, the way that this is structured is that about half of the questions in constitutional law are going to come from individual rights. And no big change there. Individual rights, all of the Bill of Rights information. And the other 12 questions will come from the rest of the subject. So half of con law is going to come from that one subject. So if there's one thing you want to look at, it's that subject. Now, those other 12 questions will be split out over the nature of judicial review, separation of powers, relation of nations and states in a federal system. It's a lot of material, but 12 questions. So when you spread it out that way, it's 1 or 2 in each one of those sections. So that's con law. Section number 3, or topic number 3, is contracts. Now, contracts, as you know, also includes Article 2 of the UCC. And one of the things I should tell you is that about 1/4 of the contracts questions, so 6 or 7 of the questions, are going to be drawn from Article 2. Okay, so we'll cover that, obviously, but that's the basic balance. What about topics within the subject generally? Well, 12 of the questions in contracts will come from formation of contracts, performance of contracts, breach, and discharge. Basic stuff. Formation, breach, discharge. Notice that's not remedies. That's interesting. 1/4 of the questions, or about 6 questions, will come from remedies, third-party rights, and defenses. Okay? So mostly, if you know how contracts are formed and what performance is and what breach looks like, you've got 12 of the questions. If you know a little bit about remedies, you're probably okay on the rest of them. So I actually think that's a pretty good balance and a good organization, a good structure between those areas. What about criminal law and procedure? Well, here, interestingly enough, half of the questions, so 12 or 13, are going to come from the constitutional protection of accused persons, so constitutional criminal law. That's what you would normally expect. The other half, the other 12 questions or so, are going to come from criminal law, homicide, other crimes, inchoate crimes, and general principles. So no big change there. 12 and 12, pretty easy, pretty balanced, I think, between the two subjects. So crim law gets 12, crim pro gets 12. Okay. Evidence, the next topic here. Well, evidence is really weird the way they did this. There are all these different categories, but here's basically what happens. Presentation of evidence is going to be worth 6 questions. So how do you present evidence? You know, refreshing recollection, objections, offers of proof, and so on. 6 questions there. Then there are going to be 8 questions on relevancy and the reasons for excluding relevant evidence. So this would be probative rule, probative value, character, expert testimony, and so on. And then there are 6 questions on hearsay. So when you're worried about hearsay, it's worth 6 questions out of 175 on the bar exam. So again, you can see why you don't have to go completely nuts. Now that gives us up to 20, and that leaves 5 questions for privileges and writings. There you go. Okay, pretty straightforward. That should make some of you feel pretty good, or at least I hope it does. All right, let's see here. Okay, just want to make sure. And by the way, those of you that are saying hello to me, I'm glad to see you as well. It's good to have you here. If you got questions, let me know. All right, now, let's move on past evidence. We go to property. Property does have some changes, and I want to just highlight these for you. I love the way only the examiners could do it this way. Approximately 1/5 of the real property questions on the MBE will be based on each of the categories 1 through 5. Okay, so there's 25 questions, 5 sections each gets 20%. Yeah, okay. Really? I mean, whatever makes you guys happy, I guess. So here's the way it breaks out. You're going to get 6 questions on ownership of real property. You're going to get 6 questions on the rights in real property. You're going to get 6 questions on real estate contracts. And then, wait for it, I know many of you are very excited, you're going to get 6 whole questions on mortgages. Oh God, please, I'm so happy. We get the 6 mortgage questions and we can finally get past the whole, there were 30 mortgage questions that I hear every exam. No, they're going to be 6. The examiners have finally said that's what we're going to do, 6 questions. So that's good news, and our editors are feverishly working, even as I speak, to make sure that you've got all the right information for that. I promise that you will, and you do. And then 6 question on title, okay? And that's it. So when you get all of those put together, that's what you're looking at in property. The only big change, and the big change there is mortgages, now being officially its own separate subtopic within property. So I'm excited about that. I know people will be thrilled to have that. In terms of torts, our final subject, half of the questions, so 12 or 13 of the questions, will come from negligence, pretty standard and what I would expect, and the other half will come from intentional torts, strict liability, products liability, and other torts. So there you go. that's what the changes are to the MBE. The truth is, if you actually have been following this really closely, not much change. I mean, the 175 breaks it down to 25 per topic, and then you get about 5 or 6 questions in each of these different subjects. So that's what we're dealing with. That's what the multi-state is about. The examiners tried to keep it as low key as they possibly could. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you guys are following along with that. If you've got any questions, make sure to let me know. I will do my very best to respond to those. Let me see. No, I think we're good here. All right, good. Moving on. The next part of what's happened is that we've got some information about the July 2016 exam. And I want to start by showing you and reading, for those of you who are listening, a memo that came out to law school deans earlier this week from the president of the National Conference, Erica Moser. And she says, I wanted to update you about the exam, the multi-state bar exam. Scoring of the 2016 July MBE has been completed. Okay, good. The national mean score is up slightly from 139.9 to 140.3. Oh boy, let me think. That's 0.4 is the change in the mean. Yeah, I know all of you are jumping up and down because 0.4 change in the mean, you can barely control yourselves, right? So here's what it actually means. 49 states in which the scores are reported, but excluding Guam, Virgin Islands, and Palau, the jurisdiction mean increased in 22 jurisdictions, it fell in 26, and there was no change in 2. Okay. So what does that mean? What is she talking about when she goes to 22, 26, and 2? What she's saying is that in 22 states, we've got the mean average score going up, but in 26 jurisdictions, it actually went down, and in 2, it didn't change at all. So you're probably saying to yourself, rightfully, did it go up in my jurisdiction or down? Well, we have no way of knowing. She didn't tell us. And she also makes clear that it's up to each state as to whether or not they want to disclose that information. So it'll take us a while to find out. Well, what does a 0.4 change overall mean? Not much. It means that the exam was at least no harder in most places than it was before, but these changes are really more related to who took the exam. So here's my, recorded for all time on the internet guess. I would say that in large jurisdictions like California, New York, Florida, Texas, those big jurisdictions, that the MBE scores probably went down overall. That's just based on historical averages and numbers. I would guess that the numbers went up in some smaller jurisdictions, not because the test was any different, but because there are just fewer people. And in the July exam in smaller jurisdictions, typically you've got fewer bar takers and more third-year law students coming out. They tend to have slightly higher scores, and so I would expect that score would go up in those jurisdictions. But in a heavily tested jurisdiction, even New York as a UBE, there's still lots and lots of people taking the test, obviously. So between New York, California, Florida, Texas, those 4 states alone, I feel like I'm on the 538 podcast these days. But in those 4 jurisdictions alone, that's probably enough to weight and bring the average down. And typically, we've seen those scores going down. And I just want to give you a sense of what that looks like here. When we look at the national mean scores from 2006 to 2015, you'll notice that they've been steadily going down quite precipitously. From 2006, the mean MBE score was 141.5, and in 2015, it was 138.7. So this change shows a slight uptick. It could be good news. It's certainly better than it going down, but I want to make sure that you don't get overly excited about that. Now, if you want to see the difference between February and July mean scores, this graph would show that to you. The 2015 scores, in February, the mean was 136.2. In July, it was 139.9. In other words, when you get more people, more first-time takers taking the exam, which is typically in July, the mean usually goes up. So this is not a huge surprise. I think what's really indicative about it is that it went up so such a small number, and that we had 26 jurisdictions in which the numbers did not go up at all. Remember that what she's saying is 26, so more than half of the country, the MBE actually fell. Why do we have this increase in the 22? Hard to say. It'll probably become clearer as we start to get some big scores in. I think when we start to see Florida in the middle of September, that will be the first bellwether. There's some small jurisdictions that report before that, but I think Florida will be the first sort of canary in the cage, if you will. Now, I also want to point out something else that Erica Mosier said in her memo, and that was that effective in February 2017, they're going to release information to the jurisdictions that will show the national percentile in which individual examinees fall in each of the 7 MBE subjects. They are not going to report numeric subscores. In other words, you're not going to hear or see how many points you got right or questions you got right out of 25 in torts or contracts, whatever it might be. But the information would tell an individual examinee how they did by subject in comparison to all other test takers. And we don't know if that's nationally or in your state on a particular administration date. But then she throws in the great caveat, the decision about whether to release this information to examinees belongs to the jurisdiction. So in other words, some states may tell you, other states may not. Gee, how exciting, how thoughtful of them. So I think that what we've got there is just a little bit of information. If you're in an exam jurisdiction like Florida or California that would tell you a little bit about what your scores are by subject, well, maybe you'll get that information now rather than the numeric score. If you're in a jurisdiction like Georgia that just gives you a pass-fail score, or not even a score, just a pass-fail result, then you're not going to get that information most likely. So that's what we're dealing with. Those are the things that have been going on. What's the upshot of all of it? First of all, if you're taking the exam in 2017, you're going to have these 25 practice questions. You won't know where they are. They'll be split and moved throughout the test. They'll be inserted throughout the exam. There'll be absolutely no way to identify them. Some of them will be awful, and you got to make sure that you don't freak out. Of the remaining 175, it'll be split over 7 subjects, so about 25 questions per subject. And within those 25 questions per subject, as you heard me talking about, it'll be divided in some new ways between the subtopics of the exam. Our materials for Celebration Bar Review will reflect and do reflect those changes. We've got all of that material already in the course. We'll update if we have to and change emphasis as we need to. But by and large, I just want you to know that we've got it covered. We understand what's going on. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that all of the big box bar reviews actually know what's happening when it comes to this, but just saying. Not trying to throw shade, just saying. I don't know that they've actually bothered to look yet. But that's where we are on all of that. In terms of the July 2016 exam, well, some places the score went up a little tiny bit. Other places it went down. So if you're a July 2016 bar taker, what do you do with that information? Nothing. You just wait for your results. It doesn't really mean anything to you. There's no way to individualize those results. I think when you look at the trend line, it's probably pretty consistent. Does it mean there's a softening of the exam or the exam's becoming easier? No, I don't think that necessarily was true. But I do think these changes coming up could make for an easier exam. I like the idea of 175 versus 190 questions. We'll see what it does to the scaling and what it does to the overall impact. It's going to create some uncertainty, that's for sure. In my podcast, episode 109, I think it is, I talked about the statistics from 2015 and February 2016 in great detail. I would encourage you to listen to that podcast if you want to know more about the numbers and the statistics. But I think at this point, that's probably all that I wanted to share with you. I just wanted to make sure that you guys didn't freak out more than anything else. I would say, based on the thumbs up I'm getting and the relative lack of frantic comments and questions, that most of you kind of get what's going on. Bar results come starting in February. Starting in the middle of September. For Florida, and then we will have a season of bar results, and as those results come out, we'll share them. We'll analyze them, try and tell you what we see from them. I know for those of you in California or Georgia where you wait till practically Thanksgiving to get your results, it's really torturous to wait, and I recognize that. Those of you in Florida may be on pins and needles just because it feels like it's getting closer. but trust me, it'll all get here in plenty of time. Look forward to sharing more information with you as we get it. Thanks for being with me today on short notice, and thanks for checking in with us, and look forward to good results for everybody as we go along. So that's it for today. Take care. Have a great weekend. Well, that's our episode for today. Thanks so much for joining me and for being part of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. Now, if you'd like to catch up on prior episodes or check out the show notes, you can do that by going to our webpage at celebrationbarreview.com. Click on the link at the top of the page for podcasts, and there you'll find all of our previous episodes as well as the show notes. You can also subscribe to the podcast from that site, or you can go to iTunes and subscribe there. Just type in the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers, and you can subscribe and be part of the podcast series. And we would love to have you do that. While you're on the iTunes site, we would also really appreciate you giving us a quick, honest rating and review. That feedback is really useful to me as I prepare these episodes. It only takes about 30 seconds, so I hope you'll do that. Just type in the name of the podcast and give us your rating and review. Again, if you've got any questions or you'd like to know anything else about Celebration Bar Review or the courses that we offer, visit our website, or I invite you to contact us. My email is jackson@celebrationbarreview.com, and I look forward to hearing from you and to seeing you along the extra mile very shortly. See you on the pass list. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.